Hello and welcome to the Lecture 4, Customer Experience Definition and Origins in Managing the Customer Experience in Healthcare and Hospitality Services class. After this rather long introduction about quality, value, and satisfaction in healthcare, we'll finally define customer experience and see how customer experience translates into patient experience. So today's topic will be dedicated towards learning the key steps in experience design process and also understanding specific tools that can help you identify how your patients experience services in your healthcare organization. Customer experience has become the focus of any service business and, among others, healthcare, ever since the emergence of experience economy paradigm in 1998. So, experience economy advocates that the value propositions and services should be created with the idea of providing pleasurable experiential memories to customers. And this is really reflected in this definition of experiences as memorable events. Now, when this is considered in healthcare context, you really have to ask yourself, who wants their hospital stay to be memorable? I mean, surely we spoke about the life cycle of healthcare and various types of healthcare organizations, but in a traditional hospital visit, patients hardly visit that hospital for the sake of pleasure. So do we really want them to vividly memorize every care event and touch point? Probably not, especially if care episodes were painful. But instead of that, we can train our healthcare staff to empathize with the patient's painful experiences during the care episodes so they can make the entire healthcare experience more pleasurable. Now, what we can also see is another definition of customer experience as a sum of all customer engagements in each touch point and every moment of truth throughout the customer life cycle. So this really reflects the idea that experience is everlasting and continuous, and it doesn't really start with a specific service that the customer is receiving, in this case, our patient. So the evolution of thought about the experience is first observed experience as a product, meaning that the products are used as props to create experiences. And in healthcare, we can hardly think about the healthcare products that are used to create experiences. Most of them are very utilitarian in nature and are designed to treat certain healthcare conditions. Now, thinking about the experience as a service, this is connected with this analogy between services and theater performance. So theater performance includes actors, audience, setting, and performance itself. So in the case of healthcare industry, we can think about hospital as a stage. So actors in healthcare experiences are both healthcare providers and patients' families, and different sorts of stakeholders in the healthcare value chain. So they can sometimes become actors, but most of the times they're actually treated as audience. Physical facilities of hospitals are settings, and the performance itself is this interaction process between the patients and the healthcare staff. Experience as a brand is the third evolution of thought about the experience, and it reflects people's internal responses to brand stimuli such as sensory, affective, cognitive, and behavioral responses. So essentially, the idea is that the service organization should create the brand, and that brand becomes the experience itself. In the hospital context, it is a bit trickier because although hospital brands are usually very clearly defined, that experience, the hospital experience, and the experience that marketers or healthcare organizations want to have as brands is not always consistent. Professional practice and academics have argued about what constitutes experiences. It has been believed that experiences are described as reconstructed events through one's own words and the language people use. So, to understand experience, you have to ask your customers, or in our case, patients, about the meanings that they ascribe to experience. Now, the major problem to that was that experiences can pretty much mean anything, and they're rarely defined in a systematic way, which is why when we talk about the experience, it's very difficult to understand what are we targeting at. Are we really targeting on patient satisfaction or the quality of care they're receiving or their subjective experience that they're telling us in their own words. So when you go back and think about the HCAHPS survey and the fact that it was stating that it measures experiences, but essentially it is not really the experience of an individual subject, it is more of the report on the quality of care they were receiving, so kind of like frequency of quality of care. You can see how those different views on what constitutes experience can occur. So another way to understand experiences by using the proxies such as attitudes, sentiments, opinions, or feelings and memories that are being shaped by experience, because this is kind of providing a bit more evaluative way to understand experience than the subjective way of experience that cannot be observed directly. Um, Third kind of view on how to ask about people's experiences is to ask them about the quality of experience. And this might be easier to capture through different elements of experience. So if you ask people about the quality of the elements that were constituting their service process, or in our case, hospital stay, you might be able to trigger better at what the overall experience was like. So I kind of advocate for a more well-rounded definition that is trying to reconcile these opposing views on the defining of experience, that states that service experience is an actor's subjective response to or interpretation of the elements of service that emerge during the process of consumption of service or through imagination or memory. So when you ask a person, what was your experience like at this hospital? You may get a story that reflects how that person felt at the moment, what were their thoughts, and what were their motivations during the hospital stay. So experiences can happen as a result of encountering various elements of healthcare service process that involve patients at different levels. Those three levels, affect, cognition, motivational or value level, are presented here in this slide, together with the illustrations of a patient's experience storyline. So the affect represents what a person feels, kind of an affective quality of their experience, more of an emotional response to the service encounter, such as diagnosis or treatment encounter. And here, for instance, in this slide, we can see how the person felt, what was going on through their head and through their heart while they were waiting in the waiting room. The cognition level represents what a person knows, thinks, and believes in relation to a healthcare encounter. So here we see that this person is really emphasizing what they've seen in the hospital, sick people, and this characteristic smell of the hospital. So this is again like something that is perceived at this cognitive level. The motivation or value level is sort of an unofficial cost-benefit analysis of the experience at psychological or economic level, as based on the information that they can receive during the encounter. So, for instance, one of my friends had a partial mastectomy at the age of 25, and this was a preventive procedure because the changes in the tissue were not really malign. However, after a couple of failed surgeries, she actually had to estimate whether she wants to go and perform this partial mastectomy, or she's going to stay away from it and just like see if additional surgeries needs to be done as the tissues change. So she was at that time estimating the benefits of preventing harm of possibly getting in cancer at one point in the future, and the cost of the effect of surgery on her self-image. So as somebody at the age of 25, having a partial mastectomy is really a strong, both emotional and psychological episode in one life. So basically, the motivation or value level can be understood as how patients believe that they would act when prompted by elements of experience that imply the values. So in this case, in the case of my friend was just thinking about how is she going to act in regards to the proposed surgery. What we can see here from this slide is that the experience is one patient's reality as experience, so it doesn't need to reflect the true reality. So the challenge here is that the patient experience through storytelling does not consist of only objective, directly observable facts. So in this case, the smell of the hospital of disinfectant, cabbage, and smoke is one patient's subjective perception that can eventually skew how the care event will be remembered as a whole. As experienced designers, managers, and healthcare leaders, we're challenged to derive the concrete knowledge from patients' stories that suggest how that experience can be improved. But it is always helpful to kind of differentiate the three levels of their experience in their storytelling. What do patients expect from experience? First, they want to be heard and remembered, which is done by having a healthcare provider run voice of patients programs and collect and share their insights across the entire organization. Second, they would like to have consistent experiences across the entire organization and channels. So the healthcare provider should constantly optimize the experience and try to keep it consistent, at least the interpersonal manner of the staff in various departments and units. Also, experiences should be timely and relevant to the patient's needs and preferences. So this is kind of the key point of the patient-centered process. And finally, discrete experiences that encounters comprise the entire experience with the healthcare organization. And as long as those discrete experiences are favorable, they can contribute to building trustworthy relationship. When talking about how to create favorable experiences, we mentioned that experience should be designed. So this stems from the idea of service design as a multidisciplinary approach to improving service offerings, systems, and processes by emphasizing experiential components of the delivery process as opposed to the outcomes. You can also hear the term experience architecting, but they are both relying on some of the basic design principles within which we're creating the framework to streamline one's experiences. Although there is no way that can guarantee us that through these steps of service design, we can create the experience as is and it's going to be consistent for each and every patient. So a lot of the times in companies, even outside of the healthcare, customer experience is not a true priority, although they like to position themselves as being very experience oriented. A lot of companies manage customer experience just via technology gadgets and marketing, but they do not truly lead it. The idea with technology is that it should transform the experience and not make it more complicated. So when I think about my personal experience with booking my medical appointments with my primary care physicians, I'm always going through the issue of whether I should call the clinic or I should just use their online booking system. So typically when I use the online booking system, it takes a couple of days for the front desk agent to respond, and then it takes again a couple of other days for me to understand, okay, let me see what are the dates that they're offering me, select the date, and then confirm the appointment. So usually it takes around a week at least to confirm the appointment. However, when I call them, I can get the same service immediately, and I can see what is the availability and book the date straight away. So I end up calling my physician's office because it is just simpler this way. So the technology that is added, the technology gadget of online booking in this case, is just an iteration of the booking process. So it's not really any innovative procedure, and it's not done with the idea to facilitate the booking process. So everything that I want from the technology that is being used in the online booking is to be timely and to be updated, and they're not really offering me that. So we call this mediumism, being just fixated on the technology instead of providing the core service experience, which in this case should be timeliness, responsiveness, and up-to-dateness. When using technology in designing customer experiences, you should think about what people want to feel, do, or share to their peers or via social media. So I would say that design and experience is not about innovating services just by adding new features. It is also about the impact of the innovations on customers' thinking, engagement, and value co-creation opportunities. So in case of my online booking, I would much rather like to see the available time slots straight away, the suggested time that it would take me to spend with my physician based on my previous visits. Also offered some of my personal preferences as if to what are the health conditions that I'm monitoring or what are the tests that I'm doing. And sometimes I would just simply like to be able to go and book a blood work, ask for my physician to order blood work done for me instead of me going to the office, seeing them, and then asking for the blood work to be done. So this is what innovation means. It is really about creating this seamless core experience without adding unnecessary technology layer that can just complicate things. Design and experience begins with empathy as an ability to understand and share other person's feelings and thoughts. Empathy in this case is used as a technique, sort of a joint reflective process that helps patients get in touch with their own experiences, and through that, they help you as a healthcare practitioner, as healthcare service employee, as environmental services employee, so any kind of healthcare employee understand what patient is going through, so being able to understand their own experiences. Empathy can also be used as a frame of mind, which means that you would have to put yourself in the reverse role of master and apprentice with a patient. When asking them questions, make them feel less like interrogation. You have to help patient open up to you and teach you about their pain. Even if you know how they might feel at that moment or what they're going through, try to be humble, listen deeply, and learn. So this is a way how you can use empathy to engage patients in the description and interpretation of their experience. And also to ensure veracity and authenticity of the experiences, you should try cross-checking with patients so their story about the experience is not too subjective, so it can still have a certain level of objectivity in that storytelling. Healthcare, as other services, has tapped into the broader design sciences such as architecture, product, graphic, and computer design, and has adopted principles to coordinate experience design. So, in this very rough kind of translation of design practices into healthcare, we can rely on performance, engineering, and aesthetics of experience. Performance of experience means to design experiences with the idea of having the services performed right the first time, so kind of reflect how well the service is done. The engineering means to build on the safety principle of good quality care and provide safe and reliable service. So this is the engineering side of the experience. And then the aesthetic side of experience should capture how that experience feels. So this third aspect has been largely neglected in healthcare until 10 years ago, but it is becoming prevalent now, and it is very consistent with the idea of being able to empathize with the patient. Now, a specific term used to denote that experiences are engineered or architected is experience-based design. Experience-based design is a patient or care-focused design process that places user experience at the center of designers' attention. Now, there are plenty of synonymous terms for that, such as participatory design, human-centered design, co-design or co-creation of experiences, people-centered design, user experience design, but don't let these confuse you. Essentially, they all revolve around the same idea of designing with or by the user and for the user. So this experience-based design approach is consistent with the patient-centric approach to healthcare services, which is why healthcare as an industry has turned to the service design procedures and turned to experiential services such as hospitality to borrow some of those experience-based design principles and implement them in a healthcare context. Experience-based design needs active participation from the patient. Now, looking into the continuum of patient influence, some steps can be characterized with low involvement of patient and others with high involvement of patient and their opinions. So, for instance, the complaining stage and the give information stage is really a low involvement of patient because until as a practitioner you start listening to the patients and implementing their suggestions, you're not really involving them highly. Just when you start consulting with them and taking their advice, we can talk about the experience-based co-design, which is really referring to patient as a highly influential entity in the process. And it's finally the time that in the healthcare industry we make a progress beyond just gathering data on patient views, which has been done for the past like 40, 50 years, and just present them to relevant committees. After that, the data usually stays somewhere forgotten, and the committees decide on what are the steps they want to take. We're talking a bit more about enabling direct contact between the patients and design professionals. So this is something of an issue that I've experienced in my consultancy practice. We've gathered vast amount of data in the times that I was working as a design consultant for a hospital. However, the executive committees really did not want to hear all the data. They wanted to hear only the selective portion about what are the things that makes them look good, and some of the issues were simply neglected. So the patients and the employees at the time were not involved as active participants in this service design process. For start, healthcare services should be based on 3 Ds of customer experience. The first one is designing the right incentive for the right customer. This means that there is no one-size-fits-all experience and that it should be personalized to better suit the patient needs. I will make a small digression about the story that I recently read online. It is about a black patient that was diagnosed with multiple sclerosis and his relationship with the physicians in the hospital. So they were explaining to him what multiple sclerosis means, but the patient just simply seemed kind of lethargic and didn't really want to ask any questions about his condition, which, I mean, being in that situation seems kind of odd, right? However, the thing was that the language that the physicians used to explain the condition was very difficult to understand, and the style of speech created this huge power distance. So until another black physician kind of separated himself from the crowd and approached the patient and with a changed style of speech explained what the condition was, that's when he was finally able to trigger an engagement from the patient who became concerned about his condition, and he was asking about the details of what he can do to improve his life and to again contribute to the positive health outcome. So it is about the fact that sometimes very small things such as this interpersonal communication can mean a lot for patients. I had a relatively similar experience when I was doing my hospital consultancy. There was a patient in the hospital who was Bulgarian, and because I'm Serbian, she's Bulgarian, our languages are relatively similar. So this patient was really not able to understand anybody in the hospital, and they needed somebody just to explain to her what was the food that she was eating because she did not really want to eat food that day. And when I found out that she comes from the same region, in a simple language, I tried to explain to her what the food service staff was trying to convey all this time, and naturally she smiled and everything seemed happier. The second principle is delivering the desired experience by focusing the entire team across various functions and emphasizing this cross-functional collaboration between the departments. So this principle means that all the departments should be updated and there shouldn't be conflicting information conveyed to patients. The third principle is developing resources to please customers all over again by providing them consistent experiences throughout the departments and throughout the encounters. So this is really related to the revamping of the planning process and training people in how to create value and establish direct accountability for the customer experience during their encounter with the patient. Now that we learned what are the three design principles, we can try to formulate a plan of action for experience design. This is essentially based on the service design thinking for iterative stages to complex experience design processes. So those four stages are exploration, creation, reflection, and implementation. And exploration, as it says, is really the stage about the discovery or research on the problems. So what you see here is not a how-to guide, but more of a framework that gives structure to the experience design process. So at first, you're not immediately trying to find a solution for the challenge and outcomes that you identify. Those solutions can be only a short fix. What you want to do is identify the problem more deeply, and you do so by assembling the data. The data can be in the form of quantitative data such as surveys or reports, but also qualitative insights that are the key here to understand patient experiences. And gathering the data is not a difficult part. This is actually quite easy, and even analyzing the data is easy if you have people that are going to do it for you. What is difficult is connecting the dots between what the data says and interpreting that in a meaningful way that can suggest actions for improvement in your healthcare organization. There are also visual methods that you can use to analyze the data and kind of interpret the insights. Specifically for the qualitative insights that we need to understand the experiences, we will dedicate kind of the entire lecture, the next lecture, to that. So we'll learn the visual tools for organizing the data and interpreting the data in the service design process. And the second stage is the creation stage. So in the creation stage, this is really the stage where ideas can happen and when concept for service improvement should be designed. So in this stage, you can propose the actions or interventions for improvement or design a concept for a new service or redesign the concept for the service. The third stage is the reflection stage, which revolves around prototyping or testing of different ideas and different concepts. And then you can kind of revert back, select some of the ideas, and implement them in the implementation stage. Of course, all that is revised after the implementation and the review of the concept, but for now on, implementation stage is going to be where we will stay with the suggestions on patient experience improvements in this class. One additional thing to note is that this process is quite iterative, which means that it doesn't really happen in a consecutive way all the time. A lot of the times when you reach the, let's say, the prototyping stage and come up with a service prototype, you actually have to go back and collect more data, gather more insights, and see how you can improve the prototype. And then it kind of follows a loop of those four iterative stages. As experience design process starts with exploration, the rest of this lecture will be focused on learning about different diagnostic methods or tools that are used to identify patient experiences. So these methods should be complementary to the surveys that healthcare organizations are already conducting to assess patient experience, satisfaction, quality of care. But because they're focused on gathering more qualitative insights, they can provide deeper understanding of the experiences and would be more useful for generating actions for improvement. A lot of these methods are borrowed from anthropology or the human observational science. So the first method that we will mention is using key informants. So these are the people that are well connected and could comment on patients' or employees' experiences and other related issues in the hospital. So these people can be the hospital staff that plays the role of liaisons. And they don't really need to be high up in the hierarchy. They can really come from different positions, either leadership positions or just subordinate positions. I think it's better to have people in various positions because then you can get a multitude of perspectives on the patient experiences. The second useful method is contextual inquiry. This is revolved around gathering the data or information in the work context together with healthcare employees. So what you can do in this case is have another person that will act as your support to take notes and conduct interviews or observe people in their kind of natural environment. If they're employees, this really is their work context of the hospital, how they act in certain position, how they perform their duties. They can kind of give you an overview of the duties that they're performing. So this context is really the key here because it provides the natural habitat where the service takes place. If those are patients, you may also think about observing them or interviewing them in their patient rooms or in the waiting rooms, or this can be also at home because they might be more comfortable to talk about their experiences when outside of the hospital. So when being in the environment, think about the prompts in that specific environment that can motivate more in-depth discussion and provide intimate insight. The third method is interactive observation. So this revolves around observing people quietly in the natural environment. This means that as somebody that's trying to get information, you're not really trying to get in touch with your observants. You're observing really how they act and what they do, and you're taking notes. So this can really be really helpful to identify different touch points in the service process. If you, again, decide to interact with them, this can be performed as a form of shadowing, where you would ask for specific explanations about the procedures. So, as I mentioned, this observation can be unobtrusive and obtrusive. If you're doing unobtrusive observation, you can just sit in the ER rooms or outpatient departments and watch how staff interacts with patients. Or you can watch those basic procedures such as checking where people queue up, the language that is being used, how people navigate the space. So this is what helps you identify those touch points and also the specific touch points that can eventually become moments of truth. So again, if you decide to be a bit more obtrusive observer and use shadowing as a diagnostic method, then you can ask staff for explanations about procedures and kind of help them perform some of the procedures if you're allowed to do so. So this is something that can really help with that hands-on learning and recording the behavior and understanding really of the employee's role in the service experience process. It is really useful to do shadowing to spot some moments of pain and notice how people may say one thing and do another, and you can kind of be a witness to that. The fourth method is photo documenting, which is again revolved around doing similar things as observation, but just taking photos alongside with notes about the patient experiences or about healthcare employees' experiences. So you can do that again by taking the role of a photographer, but you can also ask employees and staff to photo document their experience through touch points. So they would make kind of a video or like photo journal of the touch points that they're going through in their daily routines. Conducting interviews is one of the most popular diagnostic methods. So the idea with interviews is to really create open-ended, kind of semi-structured questions that can motivate this informal conversation with employees or patients in their context that they have chosen on their own. So in comparison to the contextual inquiry, ideally, you can arrange this interview to take place anywhere where your subjects choose. So you can meet in a cafe, you can meet at their home, or you can meet at their work. It's really up to them to choose the environment. So the environment is not the key here, and you don't need to observe the environment to understand the experiences in their own words through the interview process. These are some of the, I posted here for you some examples of the open-ended questions that you can use. So you can start with your questions in the form of, tell me what you know about the specific service experience, or what was the best example time, what do you remember about, what did you like. So the key is really that those questions are open-ended. And I've also uploaded a diagram from Bate and Robert book on Canvas that shows you different stages of the interview process. I would probably say that some of the guidelines that I have for successful interview conducting is that you have to listen well, try to be respectful, and kind of be aware of your own role and the role of your interviewee. The idea with interviews is to encourage dialogue, but also allow your interviewee to take the conversation somewhere else if that is relevant to their experience. Or if you notice discomfort, then you can kind of stop asking questions that seem to kind of gauge at those very painful emotions. So the interesting thing about interviews is that reporting the findings from interviews to healthcare staff is the most difficult part, because not everybody wants to hear what you find out, and they may see interviews, especially those with patients, as negative criticism. And if that happens, there is very weak chance of improvements that are taking place spontaneously after hearing the interview report. So usually when you're presenting the findings from the interview, you have to think about presenting them in some form of a summarized way that nobody really feels hurt or provoked individually, so that they're directed towards healthcare employees as a group, and then they're also being delivered by patients as a group. The next diagnostic method is very similar to interview, or more or less it's an extension of an interview just conducted with a group of people at once. So the focus groups is really a moderated group discussion on the selected topic with a group of people. The idea of gathering people is to try to create a group of people that have similar motive for being at your focus group, but what I like to say is that it's better if people are a bit diverse, so they don't all come from the same department, because then you can just target one point of view, and if they're coming from different departments, you can get multiple perspectives on the same problem. Focus groups should spark conversation and ideas from interaction between the participants. I use focus groups in my consultancy, and something that I suggest is to keep employees and patients separate. So don't mix up these two groups, because otherwise you will not be able to get at honest responses. Another thing that is useful is to have people at the same kind of positions or levels in the hospital. So do not mix leadership with their subordinates, because then again their comments might not be as honest as they would be. You can also think about separating participants based on the gender or departments or years of experience. So the only kind of real suggestion is to try to balance out the representatives in your focus groups who can get at comparable responses. Other diagnostic method is storytelling, which is really about asking patients or employees to tell you the story with minimal interruption. So storytelling allows people more freedom in how they express their experiences, and sometimes it will not reveal much about the sequence of activities in service process, but it will show you a bit more spontaneous way of reporting the experiences. You can think about asking people some prompt questions, such as what happened next, or who was with you, where were you. You can also combine this with photos or videos by allowing patients to record themselves, or even you can record themselves. You can record the participants while they're sharing the story, and then you can understand again what is happening based on the voice and the expressions they're using while they're telling the story. And final diagnostic method is mystery shopping. This is revolved around hiring other people to pose as mystery customers. So they're fake customers that are really observing and testing the service processes. And I've done mystery shopping myself. And one thing that I can tell you is this best works when it's done by an external company. So if you're running your own team, don't try to impose mystery shoppers who are people that they might already be familiar with. There are some ethics related issues with mystery shopping in healthcare industry, and healthcare industry has been really advocating that employees should not be punished or fired based on mystery shopper reports. This controversy about secret patients was really instigated around like 10 years ago, because physicians sold this practice as widely unethical, claiming that it takes away valuable time and resources from the real patient. So while they're interacting with a secretive patient, somebody might be suffering with a real serious health condition, and that physician is wasting the time on the secret patient, not being able to help out that patient. So I think I will post an article that speaks a bit about that technique. And then you can kind of estimate for yourself whether mystery shopping can be useful or not. But I think that the general consensus has been that you can use mystery shopping in healthcare context as long as it's restricted in a way that it does not harm physicians and real patients. Service safari is a technique that is similar to mystery shopping, but you can take ordinary people and also combine people from other departments, because they would just be asked to record good or bad experiences with a phone, camera, and take notes. The idea is that the service is observed and documented in the wild, so they will be able to report on the service experiences of others in the wild. So in conclusion to the differences between satisfaction, experience, and quality of clinical care, what we can definitely see is that satisfaction ratings, quality of clinical care, and general quality evaluations, as well as experience, are not the same concepts, although they're conceptually and empirically related to a certain extent. So what can frequently happen is that patients have different expectations, and because they have different expectations, their satisfaction ratings are going to differ. So what you get there is this happy slave syndrome, meaning that only the fact that the patient is feeling well and they've survived surgery, they would rate the hospital very high on their satisfaction scores, when their overall experience might not have been the greatest. So satisfaction is frequently assessed through those surveys that we've gotten ourselves familiar with, and they represent a sort of summative evaluations. So in contrast to experience, this is assessed pretty individually through different diagnostic methods that we just covered, and they're able to gauge at certain elements of quality of care, as well as satisfaction, as well as the overall experience. So they're a bit more comprehensive, although highly subjective evaluations. The idea is that satisfaction is basically a success outcome of good patient experience. So patients can have great experience, and if their expectations have been equal or lower, then they would be satisfied. However, even though the experience has been overall pretty good, if we're talking about a potential objective category of the experience, but the patient's expectations have been pretty high, then they won't be satisfied. And then there comes the question about how useful the measures of satisfaction are. The idea is in generally that you can also ask people to express their satisfaction with specific encounters, while what we perceive patient experience to be is a very holistic way of looking at the experience from the beginning of the cycle all the way throughout the customer life cycle and all over again.